If it's time to get started, we can jump in. I'm so excited to be a part of the 2024 Root and Written conference this year. From the chatter I'm hearing in the hallways, the students, fellows this year are just incredible, and really looking forward to meeting all of you. We have about an hour today, a conversation with Eirinie Carson. I can introduce Eirinie and then dive into questions, and we will have some time at the end as well for folks to submit questions through the Yap app, I believe, on the social feed. So I'll try to be monitoring that for your all's questions as well.
Yeah, we're sci-fi today. We're in the building, but online.
Okay.
I think we should also introduce you too.
Okay.
Okay. I'm lucky enough to be talking with Dani Thiemann, who is the recipient of the 2021 Nelligan Prize for Fiction from the Center of Literary Publishing at Colorado University for his short story, One Bad Night in San Jose, Costa Rica. A recipient of the 2020 Tobias Wolff Award for Fiction for his short story, Echolocation for Mixed Race Runaways, published in the Bellingham Review, a recipient of the New York City-based Table 4 Foundation New Writer Award for his short story Gotham, Mexico, a recipient of the Madeleine Lamont Award for Fiction from the American University in Cairo, and his work has appeared in New Delta Review, Bosque Magazine, and the Bellois, how would we say that? Belwa, I'm going to try that, fiction journal. He is currently an assistant attorney in the international program at Earth Justice.
Great, thanks so much, Eirinie. I will return the favor and introduce Eirinie. Eirinie Carson is a member of the Writers Grotto here in San Francisco, so plug in for you all to join as well. A frequent contributor to Mother Magazine, and her work has appeared in Lit Hub, Notre Dame Review, Mortal Mag, and Electric Literature, the Sonora Review, and others. And Eirinie was a NEA Distinguished Fellow at the Cambridge Center and is a 2024 alum at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, which is so incredible.
That's fun.
Her memoir, which is what we'll be talking about today, The Dead Are Gods, was published by Melville House, and it was an Oprah Daily Spring 2023 reading list pick. It won a Zibby Media Award for Best Book for The Griever in 2023, and was a Kirkus Best Book of 2023, which is so amazing. Excerpts of it appear on LitHub as well. Some of the reviews I thought were so touching, and so I wanted to highlight some of them here. Kirkus wrote that the book is as elegant and moving as a grief memoir can be. Oprah Daily wrote that the book struck a deeply resonant chord for anyone who has experienced the obsessive self-searching that often accompanies a sudden loss. People magazine has wrote the book was a gorgeous, grief-stricken remembrance. And Shondaland wrote that Carson captures the pervasive nature of grief with a poetic voice that beautifully resonates. And finally, Zibby Owens for Good Morning America wrote that the book is a raw, heartfelt, beautiful, soul-opening, and real. I also love that Eirinie made a playlist for her book, which you can find at the website Large Hearted Boy, which I have been listening to, and it's awesome.
Oh, thanks.
So do you want to start, maybe, Eirinie? Do you want to maybe just do a quick just summary of the memoir for those who haven't read it in the room or online, and then pick a selection to read us, to ground us?
Yeah, sure. So my book is a memoir. It is about the loss of my best friend, Larissa, who died this past month. It will have been 6 years exactly. And it's about the mysteries of her death and the love that we shared. And our friendship was a formative friendship, very much coming of age. We were models together in London in the early 2000s, and kind of on this gritty early 2000s scene, we formed this very deep platonic love. Yeah, and so it's about the grief and the loss of her. And I guess I'll read now. Rowena did ask me to speak up, so let me know if you can't hear, but I famously have a voice for the stage, so I believe in myself. I think we can do this together. My book is also about the what I feel is a need to honor our dead by telling the truth about them rather than flattening them into 2D characters. So this chapter is called I Don't Like You. There were things I didn't like about you. You weren't perfect. You could be stubborn in a truly baffling way, immovable as solid marble. There was nothing you could be made to do except maybe by your mother. You were bad with money, but then that's a bit the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? I was also bad with money. I suppose all people in their early 20s are, but sometimes you would prioritize a fancy meal over our looming rent. Sometimes we would both forget the essentials, the adult responsibilities we were supposed to be paying attention to. And as a result, our finances were chaotic. Our rent was always late, our tab always paid for in shrapnel. Your silences could be isolating. I understood them, sure, but that didn't mean I wasn't often devastated by their coldness. It didn't mean I wasn't often swallowing down my own feelings because I knew they would be met with a stony quiet. You were selfish. It was primarily about you. Everything was about what you wanted. And so I had to shift myself over to accommodate, to make sure you were attended to. Sometimes I felt like a lady in waiting, and sure, you were a glamorous queen to wait upon, but I was second tier. I was supporting role. I was your partner in crime when I wanted to be you, wanted to be the fulcrum. You could be reclusive. Not that this is inherently bad, but at times when mixed with your stubbornness, it meant we could go days without seeing each other, even when we lived in the same flat, even when you were only a hallway away. You were content by yourself, and it often forced me to find a way to be like that too. You could lock yourself away, resisting replying to me through the door. I was often shut out of your world, out of your head. Even when living, time meant almost nothing to you. You were always late. A meet-up time, a suggestion, a deadline, a lap line to be crossed at your leisure. I was forever apologizing for us not being on time. I was forever sitting in the living room, waiting for you to get ready. I would be fully dressed and made up while you dusted the nighttime sleep from your eyes and meandered lazily to the shower. It wasn't quite disrespect, I knew that, but at times it felt like what I wanted, the schedule I kept, was completely invisible to you. I think it's important to remember the shitty things about you, Larissa. I don't want you to be a saint. I don't want to lie about the type of person you are. So many of the pure joys of knowing you lie side by side with some of your worst faults. I want to be honest about this. I want, if you are listening from wherever dead people listen from, for you to feel some contrition about how you behaved, even to me, even to a long-time best friend. Your attention could swivel quickly. You always had a shiny new person who was introducing you around, taking you to new places. You liked the new and the shiny, which often meant you would pivot away from me, temporarily distracted for a week or a month or however long it took for the new year before the new pissed you off, because they always did. People didn't always take the time to observe you, not properly. They didn't see the invisible landmines, the boundaries never to be crossed, the soft and fragile parts of you to be handled with care. And so they inevitably fucked up, and you inevitably came back to me. I suppose I did this too. It wasn't like I was hanging on your every word, but I didn't pivot so readily from you. Not until the end. And even then, I didn't know why I was so keen to look away. Now I know I didn't want to bear witness to what I am sure somewhere inside me I knew was a steady demise. Was it revenge, the sudden turning of my head? To get you back for all the times my emails went unanswered, for the times you were too busy to talk or meet? When I look over those final messages, it sure seems like that. A willful ignorance, a shutting tight of my eyes. Was that me regaining control in the end? finally telling you I wouldn't be bossed around by your moods, wouldn't be the baby anymore, wouldn't be subservient. In the light of everything that happened, of how you died, I now see you needed my knowledge of you, needed me to pay closer attention so that I could help, so that you could let yourself be helped. It seems foolish, blind even, that I didn't lift a finger at the end, but then you had done your signature move. You had shut the door in my face, and I hadn't bothered to wonder what was behind it. What was the reason you didn't want me looking? If I had, maybe I could have stopped you. Maybe I could have intervened. I fluctuate between thinking I could have helped you in any real way and seeing the reality of the situation, the reality of who you were. All of the flaws mentioned were precisely why I couldn't help you. Your selfishness, your tardiness, your reclusiveness, these were the things that were barriers, things you purposefully constructed to keep people out, and they worked well, too well. In the end, maybe I was a bit fatigued by your peculiarities. I didn't have time to cater to your whims. Maybe in the end, we were both flawed. I like to believe you would have asked me outright for help if you'd had the courage. I like to believe you would have known that the understanding and space I always gave you would have been valid currency, even when faced with the truth of you, the truth of your life then. But maybe not. Maybe you had so barricaded yourself into your own mind that you forgot temporarily, a glaring error, that I had the capacity to understand you. Maybe you have been reclusive for so long you truly believed you were on your own. That you weren't, because I haven't left your side now. And you've been dead for over 2 years. You weren't, because I would never leave you. It's so lovely to hear like distant applause. That's really cute. I feel like a little mouse.
Well, thank you for that reading. You do have a voice for the stage. It's true.
Could you hear me through the,
Yeah.
nice.
I will also try to speak a little louder, so hopefully they'll let us know if we are the little mice we think we are, and we need to. So I think it would be amazing for the students here to hear a little bit about your background as a writer first, before we dive into the content of the book and craft and things like that. So could you just talk a little bit about your background as a writer and how you got this book across the finish line? How did you get it to being published? Kind of where you started and then how you got to that moment.
Well, I am a college dropout. I feel like that's really important to say off the top. It was a factor that I considered eliminated me from the possibility of ever being an author. I really believed that for a long time. And that's not true. And it's really lovely to know that that's not true. But imposter syndrome is a bitch. And my lack of an MFA is taunting me whenever I have a quiet moment. So I kind of had to get through the boundaries I put up for myself first, in recognizing that sometimes there's a story to be told and it doesn't really matter who tells it. I mean, it matters who tells it, but it doesn't really matter whether you have a degree or not. And somewhat ironically, in a horrible twist of fate, Larissa was the person for me who we lived together for many years. And she spent the whole time being like, you're a writer, right. And so there is this kind of sadness that from the soil of her death grew this book. And I would change that in a second. But I also think it's kind of a beautiful thing that from the moment I began to write her eulogy for her funeral, I didn't really stop writing. And eventually a friend told me that I had a book in front of me. And that was kind of where that was built from. And I am an inaugural participant in Rooted and Written. I think it was 2019. And I had like the scraps of this book, like didn't even know the shape of it. but had been kind of writing, but had applied for Rooted and Written because I was like, oh, I'm going to write a short story collection. This writing that I'm doing about Larissa is nothing. It's just catharsis. And then I spoke to Danielle Speckhoff, who is an agent, and she was doing a how to query an agent class at Rooted and Written. And I spoke to her and we chatted, and my book evolved in the time it took me to email her. And my email landed in her inbox like a week after her dad had died. And she couldn't hold that book for me. But she had a colleague who really loved it. And so I got an agent kind of through Rooted and Written, and being a really annoying emailer. That's tip number one, is send lots of emails, unsolicited, it doesn't matter. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah, we're just plugging Rooted and Written. That's like as we should. Actually, I didn't know that. I didn't know the close connection the book had to this conference. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's nice.
Um, okay, so I'd love for us to dive into the content of the book. And before getting too close to the text, I was really curious if you could talk to us about organizing it. And I think you had an interview with Booksmith where I think you said you actually printed out pages of the book and put it up on the walls, um, around you. And um, one of the things I was curious for you to first talk to us about is what were you looking for when you were putting the sections up on the walls around you, printing them out? What were you looking for in terms of like how to organize information and put it, some things side by side and other things not?
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, well, in printing it out, I wanted to see the full book, and I felt kind of like a mad TV detective, just like everything on the wall, just trying to figure out the culprit. But I kind of themed that. I'd put them thematically, each kind of chapter essay thematically, and I thought that if I interdispersed them, because I didn't really think that I didn't really necessarily want to tell the story linearly, but as I was writing the book, things came to light, that I didn't know when I first decided that this was going to be a book. And so that kind of threw a spanner in the works. And I also, Larissa dies, obviously. She died, and the cause of her death was something of a mystery for me, or so I thought at the beginning of the book. And through writing, I was kind of always avoiding the subject of her death because how she died, because it felt sacrilegious. It felt I don't know, it felt like something I couldn't touch for whatever reason, which I think I lay some reasons out in the book, some theories. But and in doing so, I found that I couldn't move forward with the manuscript at all. And it wasn't until a friend told me that it was necessary for me to just, even for a thought experiment, write an essay about the way she died. And that kind of cracked the book open for me and gave the book an arc, for want of a better phrase. It's difficult when it's memoir and it's someone's life that I'm talking about, and I'm talking about arcs. It feels yucky, but it was to tell the story and to follow me through my grief and my revelations. I needed it to move in this certain way. And so that's kind of what I was looking at when I was pinning all those pieces up. Yeah.
Like you said, that was such a big part of the book to me is that you didn't know things about your friend. And as a reader, that gave, it was almost like we were going along that journey with you. And so in a way, the book is about epiphanies, about what you realize about other people. And this kind of brings me into one of the questions I had about how you think about epiphanies or takeaways, you know, so I have a question, but just want to give some context for it first. So for folks who haven't read the book, you know, you write that your friend Larissa would have loved to have known your daughter, particularly how stubborn she is, which I thought was such a endearing observation, but particularly because your friend Larissa loved a woman who knew her own mind. And you wrote about that idea right after writing a passage about how long your grief lasted, and how almost that that grief was a way of you knowing your own mind too.
Mm,
And you know, um, without necessarily coming out and saying it, but like putting those two ideas together, kind of led at least me to kind of have that kind of a realization or epiphany about what grief is, about it letting us learn our more about our own mind. And you have other passages too. For example, you wrote about when you all were young, living together with not a lot of money, and you talked about how hard it was to save money when you couldn't imagine a different future. And you write about that right around the time you're also writing about one of the really hard things about grief being that you can't imagine living without someone. And so you don't really equate these two imaginations, but you almost suggest that one imagination holds the key for the other. And so I was kind of wondering if this uh, way that you put these ideas close to one another, to give the reader something to take away, like sounds accurate, or if you would actually characterize what you're doing a little differently, and how you um, would like talk to young writers about, you know, overwriting, you know, with epiphanies where you're kind of coming to a conclusion versus kind of putting things out there for the reader to let them take away what they can from the work.
mm. That's a great question. I feel I was really adamant when I realized that this was a book about grief that it wasn't going to be any type of self-help book.
Mm,
And so I wonder whether I am exploring this now for the first time with you, but I wonder whether my resistance to drawing a direct comparison was the resistance of laying anything on the reader that they had to think. I just wanted to like, here is the meal. You can eat it in whatever order you want. And so I mean, I definitely when I was when I, as I was thinking about these questions, I was like, wow, I don't even know if that was a conscious decision. I think it was more of I came in with a certain mindset of I'm not going to tell anyone how they should feel about anything in this book, but I'm going to say how I feel in these moments. And hopefully from that will come some epiphanies of your own. And I feel that whenever I speak to readers, people who've loved this book, um, that has been something that has been picked up on. And just how common I mean, grief is a very common thing, and yet it can feel so lonely and it can feel so particular. And so I was really trying not to say, this is how it is. These are the things that you should draw conclusions from, but rather just, this is, here are the ingredients, you know?
yeah, it's amazing. One of the things that I picked up on about like what was particular for you and your grieving, was that you seem to kind of explore how um, certain emotions that we might think as negative, so people pitying you in grief, um, or you know, the um, idea of like guilt about your about Larissa dying. You have these passages where you actually kind of flip the kind of negative associations with these. Um, and I bring it up because it seems to be really important to thinking about like arcs, and like, you know, we often are like hear about character arcs and transformation. And like the way you complicate these emotions and like flipping them seems to make that this kind of arc so powerful in the memoir. And so I had a question about this, but I wanted to bring in what I thought was one incredible response you gave in an interview with Katie Tamala at Shondaland, that's kind of about this topic. And there in that interview, Katie says that one of the most powerful lines in your book for her was when you said that you actually enjoyed being told, "I'm so sorry, Eirinie." And you said, I want them to be sorry. I want them to pity me because I pity me and I know no other way to be right now. And, Katie mentions that that's very vulnerable, first of all, and courageous, but also relatable. And and she asks, why do you think as a society we place such negative connotations on pity? And your answer I thought was so amazing. You said, um, you think that negative associations because, it means you need to be taken care of. And no one wants to take care of anyone. If you're pitying someone, it can make it sound like you're helpless. Um, and but maybe really that's what you need, to have someone witness your grief and hold you through it. And so flipping this kind of idea of pity as from negative to positive, I thought was tied to this incredible like power and the like transformation the narrator goes through in the grief. And likewise, there's just one more emotion just to touch on that had this transformation, which is about guilt. And noting in your book that um you felt some guilt about the death because it happened after you saw yourself fully formed. But that guilt kind of was almost positive then because it was like a sign of like self-development, I guess, or like self-sufficiency. Um, and so I was kind of wondering if you could say more um, about this like challenging assumptions about how you're supposed to feel, either about grief or a moment, and like how you might tie that to what other people are working on in this conference when they're thinking about writing and and change in characters, about challenging what folks are assumed to feel in a moment, and what that can do for a writer.
Mm. Well, I think with the notions of pity, with the notions of grief, with the notions of guilt, it can be really easy to just avoid those subjects altogether because or flatten them out. And I felt with this book that it was really important that I was as painfully honest as I could be, often to, I think, my detriment. And I think that particularly the pitying, I remember it vividly. I can see where I was in the world. I stood on the front porch as I called people and told them that Larissa had died, and I was like emotionless as I listened to them, our friends, our family, like cry. And I just wanted, I needed my pain mirrored back to me because I couldn't. And I think that was there's a common theme in the book. Often I am grieving through watching someone else grieve, um, and that's my specific grief journey. And I don't think I would have learned that about myself had I not been honest about um, how I was feeling in those moments. And I guess as a larger conversation about writing, I think I always had the feeling that if I wrote it down, that meant that someone would see it. And my drafts folder will tell you that that's not true. I find that sometimes writing about these difficult things is it's almost like when you have a diary and you're not fully being honest, even in these reflections of your day, you're kind of skirting around it because you still want, if anyone were ever to read this, they need to think that I'm cool or funny or brilliant or whatever. And I feel like it's akin to that. And I think that sometimes as writers we're really good at avoiding these difficult um, topics, particularly with memoir, particularly when you're writing about tough things like death. and addiction and young death. So I think like the only way out is through, which I literally just quoted my own book, but I'm gonna do it, stand by it. So I think writing through these feelings is how we get to a place of understanding, and that's how, in turn, we can have our readers understand.
Had a couple questions more on I think those hard feelings, but first I think it would be great to talk a little bit about style a little bit. And um you know, you have this passage in your book where you say your friend Larissa loved the ornate, loved the flowery, didn't like much care for the passages of you know, how a person got from point A to B, which in craft workshops, you know, people are, that's like such a common thing. Like, I don't know where we're at, or how did this person get from there to there? And you just, so correct me if I'm wrong, but just recently, so you have this memoir published, comes out, you have now a book of fiction that's sold at auction, and you're working, it sounds like, on revisions or waiting for revisions on this work of fiction. And
Yes.
I'm really kind of curious to hear, you know, what you noticed in the differences in writing the memoir versus fiction when it came to this question of style. You know,
Mm.
Was Larissa's hand, you know, pushing for the ornate kind of like at 100, like at you know, on the fiction in a way it couldn't be in the memoir, or not? You know, what did you notice about your
Mm.
style in switching these two from these two genres?
Well, apparently I did this book order the wrong way around. Apparently I meant to do fiction first and then do a memoir. I didn't know that, so I did a memoir. But I definitely look, Larissa and I have very different flavors of writing that we enjoyed. And I don't know if I will ever be the writer that she wanted me to be, but I hope that just me writing is enough for her. Which I feel like it is, not to get too witchy about it, but I feel like she's cool with it. But I mean, writing memoir, especially grief, and a book that I wrote like as these feelings were happening, I was writing them. There is no separation from the moment and the book. I didn't write this book 10 years after the fact. I wrote it while it was happening, while I was processing, arguably in the most difficult points of grief in those first few years. And so, because of that, it was a very painful book to write. And I also naively believed that once I finished the book, my grief would be done. It's not. And so I have a therapist, she's great. But I kind of was so ready to move out of fact and my own pain. So writing fiction felt natural to me. Although ironically, I mean, I think such as being a writer, I ended up writing kind of about myself in this book of fiction too. Um, but there is something freeing about it. But now I'm having the opposite feeling where I'm like, oh, I could probably write another nonfiction piece now. I've had enough distance from that. Yeah.
So I had two more questions about this. I'm going back to the memoir, and then maybe we can turn to questions. So for folks who have the ability to submit questions, please do so. Um, so the next question I had was um, in how you like, what advice you have for folks on thinking about how to generate kind of emotional responses in your reader. So in your memoir, you're processing a lot of your own emotional experiences. And I'm kind of curious, I guess, first, before diving further, like into this topic, like how did you think about, like, were you thinking about like, okay, these are my emotional experiences, and like were you thinking about like how is this going to land with readers, or what am I going to change for kind of the readers kind of perspective, like, or were you kind of just like, I can't think about that at all, I need to just kind of think of, you know, kind of close and think about my own experiences? Like how did you think about like changes or techniques you might use, if at all, and about the emotional response for a reader?
Well, I think I was saved by the fact that a lot of this book was written before I even knew it was a book. And so I didn't have that long to really consider, like to really like stress myself out thinking about what this would look like to a reader. And I think something that my editor at Melville House and I talked about was our desire to kind of leave it quite raw, because we felt, because it was written as I was grieving and so much was captured, the shifts in tense, the switching of who I'm talking to, it's all indicative of where I was mentally at that time. In where there was no real timeline, there was no real clear, there was no clarity. I was writing in a fog, trying to find my way out while I wrote. And when I finally got out, some would argue I'm still in it. I don't know what, we could call my therapist later and ask. But when I tried to get out, I realized that actually the fog part was what I'd written about, and that's what I wanted to keep condensed. I think if I had cleaned it up and made it these essays that felt maybe like some other essays that I've written that are more traditionally structured, I might lose that feeling that has resonated with a lot of people. And it does resonate with people who have had profound loss, in particular because they recognize the fog. It's not strange to them. I think my book doesn't make sense if you don't recognize that fog, if you don't really understand the shape of it. Lucky you. But for people who have experienced profound loss, we seem to like meet each other there. And that feels really, really fucking good. And I've completely forgotten your question now. What was it?
I think you've answered it, because thinking, the question was about how much were you thinking about a reader's experience of it? And you were saying luckily you were writing so much of it before you were really intending it to be a book.
I do think like were I to write this book now, it would probably look very different because it's been 6 years. There is a separation. My grief is somewhere completely different now than it was in those first few days. And I really stand by that. I think that's advice for every writer, that if you write something that feels true to you, truly, truly true, then what can anyone say? Fuck Goodreads, they don't know shit. But no one can say anything to you because you will know that you wrote your truth the best you could.
One last kind of follow-up question I had on this was about writing about Larissa's mother, which like some of the passages about her honestly were it's like some of those heartbreaking pieces in the book. You write about how you saw her break down and how it made your heart empty out, kind of realizing how your sadness was next to hers. And I wanted to bring in a review that the Washington Post wrote about the book. What I thought was really interesting on this topic, because Tahir Oxman, who's a professor of literature, I believe, on the East Coast, was writing that like one of the powerful things about your book is it shows how one can love and be loved fully and powerfully and still withhold parts of oneself. And that it's that this loving while withholding tension that's really the essence of grief. And I thought at first like, oh, that's really true. And then I was realizing like you, in portraying Larissa's mother, you complicate that actually. It's like she's someone who withheld like nothing, and that was uh a way to show, like you said, you're not trying to say there's one way to grieve, right? But I was wondering if you might talk a bit about just like how it was to write about Larissa's mother, who's someone who you've met, like for other folks who might be writing a memoir where there's people who are still living, who they're about, but also how you think about the use of like different people with different emotional experiences in a book, and how that can actually increase, the maybe a reader's like feeling of what's going on, like just showing people's different reactions. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit, yeah, about writing about Larissa's mother and then just the differences. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of ethics about memoirs, about where you can tread and where you can't. For me, I know Larissa's mum really well. I lived with her for a while. Like, she is a traditional Ghanaian mother who, if my kid loves you, I love you. And I was just kind of in the fold. And so writing about her was difficult. But the whole book kind of began with her. I wrote this eulogy, but I also wrote a letter to her because at Larissa's funeral, her mum, or the day before, her mum had said, um, had been asking me for stories about Larissa. She was like, just give me, anything. And I just was kind of dazed, and not able to do it then. And so I wrote this letter later to her mum, and shared like some things about Larissa, that I thought she might enjoy. Um, so the book kind of comes from that relationship with that person. And also Larissa's mum was withholding a lot. She was still is unable to look at how her daughter died. She still has a really hard time with um, anything to do with Larissa. Um, and she is kind of in this like loop of grief that doesn't seem to be ending. And so there were a lot of questions I had for her, for people around me, for people who loved Larissa, of like, can I tell this story fully and still respect my relationship with her mum and with her family? And I felt that I could. And Larissa's mum has not read this book. She read it in draft form. Actually, that's a lie. She did read it in draft form. And she just had a really hard time with um, looking at anything to do with Larissa, full stop. And so I removed a lot of things from the book that were originally in it to do my best to respect her family whilst also respecting my story. Because it is my story and it's entangled with my own family story in ways that become clear towards the end of the book. So yeah. But Ijoma, oh my gosh, what's her last name? Olu, is that how you say her last name? She is a writer, lives in Seattle. She has a really beautiful blog post on who gets to tell this story. And she kind of has a checklist that you can go through, that I went through, to make sure that it's your story to tell. And so I would highly suggest that. I'm going to find that link for you. But for anyone who's writing a memoir and considering where the line is there.
Well, one of the last questions that I had touches upon maybe so you talked earlier about the fog, right? Like the fog, like the shape of the fog. And like obviously that is so different from Marissa's mom. And for you, one of the things that I thought was interesting when you were talking about your own fog was your mention of the use of time and shifting tenses. So actually I wanted to just highlight some sentences where you do that, where I thought that was really interesting. Um, you'll have a sentence where you say what was, comma, is the loss. Or you'll say when you're writing to Larissa, you were a good listener. In fact, you still are. Again, kind of switching time. You have another line that says, so much of grief is the sudden chasm between the things we wish we had said or asked or acknowledged and what we'd actually done, period, all those dead people, period. And so the last sentence or that second sentence, they're just having no verb tense at all. I was kind of curious, like, did you notice yourself playing with time in your fiction as well? Or was this something so more rooted in that fog of grief that that's really where the place where you did that more?
I do actually play with time in my fiction. That's funny that you should mention that. Yeah, no, I'm really obsessed with the notion of non-linear time and the idea that time is kind of a palimpsest of things, of moments. Um, and so when editing this book and when faced with like, do you want to shift the tense of this? Do you want to stop talking to Larissa and only talk to the reader? The answer was always no, because when I wrote those pieces, I was kind of losing my mind. I wasn't the person that I am in this moment. And so to capture that, I think I needed to honor the truth of this kind of almost clairvoyant writing that I was doing. I wanted Larissa to feel present. And every time that I tried to relegate her to past tense, it felt unnatural to me. And so often I bring her back in the book in present tense. Even when I'm speaking in this conversation, I multiple times referred to her in the present tense. And it is only because I love her and because I believe that I can love her still, that I can shift. I feel the freedom to shift around tenses like that. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Um, so I have one last question, and maybe I might ask Sabina, Rowena, if they're there to help me with other questions. I'm not sure if I'm doing that part right. So, but the last question I had for you goes back to something you mentioned earlier when you were speaking with this book about, I think in a couple interviews, about that moment where you got stuck and it was your friend telling you, well, face the hard thing, face the thing that you um, that's been difficult for you. So do you have just advice for folks in the room today or listening of like how to do that? Like what was it about, for example, the essay you wrote? Like was it just the idea of doing it, or was there something you did that really helped to break you out of that rut or that stuck?
Yeah.
Uh,
I think the way in which she died, which I feel like we kind of have to talk about candidly now because the book's been out 18 months, like spoiler alerts abound. But the way in which she died was so linked with things that happened in my own life. And I think that I wasn't talking about it partly because I was concerned um, that it might feel sacrilegious, but also because I wasn't sure it was mine to talk about. And when I wrote the essay that I wrote, where I really talk about the way in which she died, I realized the similarities that her death had with my father's life. And I realized, oh, that is also why I don't want to talk about this, because it's mine. And that is a difficult thing to unpack. Like it's not this thing that happened to someone else. It's something that happened to me, specifically my brother. It happened to my family. And those parallels were the things that I was trying not to draw. And had to to make this book make sense and to have it feel true.
mm,
Ooh, what's happening off
okay.
stage?
Okay, there's movement on the stage. Okay, I think people are putting some questions into the apps. So, okay. So we'll turn to some of those. Before we do, I do just want to say like what an incredibly like beautiful place to end for our questions for this conference in particular, where I think one of the taglines, at least last year, was like your words matter. And thinking about like what each of our own stories are and how to reclaim them and make them our own. So thank you for that
Oh, thank you, Dan. I
beautiful
appreciate
response. That ties in
it.
so well to our conference. So one of the first questions I'm seeing here from um, the audience is how much of your early writings after Larissa died changed as the manuscript evolved?
Um, that's such a good question. some of the earlier pieces remained intact, because I felt it was like important to show the evolution of the grief. But for the most part, did I edit any? I mean, I did edit them, but nothing really changed too drastically, except that I allowed for sentences that pondered the way that she died to remain. Initially, I was like, I'm going to take these out because what's the point if I'm not going to talk about how she died? And so leaving those in felt right. And once I had realized that I was going to include her death, I realized that they were everywhere, that actually I had these questions throughout that I was just ignoring. And so it felt good to kind of see that evolution.
Okay. Let me see if there are others. Okay. Do your nonfiction and fiction writing practice inform each other?
Yeah, I guess. um, yeah, they do. I think that one thing I learned in writing this book is the things that resonated with people the most, the things that I get repeatedly told meant something to people are the moments often where I felt like, this is a bit too real. Like maybe I should like tweak this or something. And so it's interesting to see in my writing now, especially when I'm writing fiction, to see that the parts that resonate tend to be rooted in my own experience pretty heavily. I saw, oh my gosh, who wrote Visit from the Goon Squad? She's a Bay Area writer. Lost her name. Someone knows it. I saw her read, and she talked about how she never writes about herself. She was like, if a character even seems like a middle-aged white woman, she's like, no interest. And I feel like I'm the opposite. I'm really perhaps egotistically into the things that are rooted in my own life and exploring them. And I think that that was a practice born out of The Dead Are Gods, which I realized I didn't show. Look, I have it here. Yay.
Okay, we have a few good questions left, and only 5 minutes, so we'll try to.
Okay.
Okay, one question is pops out really interesting. So, from what I understand, you've done modeling work in the past, and one of the questions is, what learnings from the modeling world, whether it's creative, marketing, or business wise, applied to your work as a writer?
Oh, yeah. Well, my God, so many things. I mean, right, modeling is essentially sales. So that helped. Being comfortable in front of strangers. Although I will say that modeling rarely requests that I talk. So that was something I had to delve into. Most of the, I've been modeling since I was 14. It's been a long time. And rarely have I ever been asked to say anything. So that was something that was different. But definitely the sales aspect. You know what helped more? I also stripped for a couple of years, and I feel like that was more helpful because stripping you really do have to like have the gift of gab, and that really helps. So if any of you have stripping in your past, I think you've got it's going to go really well talking to publishers and selling your book.
Um, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of old white men in publishing, a lot of old white men in strip clubs. So it's a Venn diagram.
That's incredible. Yeah, incredible. The last two questions I think are kind of turning back to your craft in this book, and then I think we'll have to end there. So, the two questions are, the chapter you read from was in second person, and this person's asking for advice on how you navigate switching perspectives in your book, like, or person, third to second person, how you made those choices. And the other question was, how do you write from within the fog? So, practices or ways that help you find the words you need to write. So these questions kind of bring us back to your craft and your writing, and then we could end there.
I think they're kind of adjoined, these questions, because often I was writing to Larissa specifically, pre-thinking that this was going to be a book. I was just writing, and often I was writing to her because I had no one else that I felt like I could talk to, and so that was how I wrote from within the fog, and also was often writing in second person. There were moments, I think those in second person, I feel like those are the earlier pieces as a rule. And I think as I kind of progress through my grief, it becomes a little more, I think I become a little distant. And so I don't think that it was a conscious decision. I think that was how I had to communicate what I had to say in the beginning. And it stopped serving me as I moved through my grief. Yeah, so letters to people. I also left like rambling voice notes for Larissa on her phone that no longer works. And that was like quite generative. And yeah, I think that's how I did it. I think that's how I did it.
And you did do it. It's such an incredible book.
Oh, thank
I
you.
loved reading it, and
Thanks.
um, highly recommend it for folks here in the room, here at the Grotto. So with that, I think let's close and just sending you our appreciation. I want to thank Savina and Rowena and Nate and all the faculty and the volunteers who make Rooted and Written possible. For folks joining online, please consider supporting. And for folks here, consider joining. It can be a really great resource. So thank you all, and we'll close.
Thank you, Danny.
Come out and see you all in a bit. Bye.
Yes. Bye.